My name is Rowan Whitfield. I'm 29, and I built a 30-clinic veterinary network across Ontario from a single rented exam room in Hamilton. For most of my life, my family treated me like the runt of the litter, the daughter who'd never amount to much because she wasted her brains on animals instead of marrying a surgeon. Then one Thursday in November, they marched into my flagship clinic in downtown Toronto like they held the deed to the place. My father set a folder on my desk in front of 2 investors and told me to hand my brother 49% of the company and the CEO title, or he'd have the landlord put me out on Bay Street by Christmas. My mother smiled the way she always did when she thought she'd won. I told him to go ahead and make the call. He didn't know I'd bought the building 18 months earlier. It was the kind of gray, sleet-spitting Toronto morning where everyone comes in smelling like wet wool. I was sitting across from 2 people I'd spent 4 months courting, a pension fund director and the principal of a healthcare-focused private equity shop out of Calgary. We were finalizing a $40 million expansion deal that would push my network into every major city west of Winnipeg. The contracts were spread across the table. I had a pen in my hand, cap off, when the glass door to my office swung open hard enough to rattle the framed licensees on the wall. I expected my assistant. Instead, I got my father, Garrett, in a camel overcoat I knew for a fact he was still paying off. Behind him came my mother, Lorna, clutching her handbag against her chest like a flotation device. And trailing them, scrolling his phone, was my younger brother, Pierce. Pierce was 31. He dropped out of 2 business programs and founded 4 companies that never made it past a logo. But he was the son, so in my parents' eyes, he'd been born ready to run things. The pension director half stood. The PE principal just went very still, the way people do when they realize they're about to witness something they shouldn't. "Garrett," I said, "you're in the middle of a client meeting." I used his first name on purpose. In this room, he didn't get to be my father. He didn't even glance at the 2 people holding my future in their hands. He walked straight to my desk and dropped a thick folder right on top of the signature pages. The slap of it echoed. "We're putting an end to this little pet project, Rowan," he announced, loud enough for the whole floor. "Open it. It's a shared transfer. You're signing 49% over to your brother, and Pierce takes the CEO chair, effective today. You can keep a vice president title and handle the back office work." I looked at the folder, then at Pierce, who was admiring his reflection in my window and didn't have the decency to meet my eyes. "You're interrupting a confidential meeting," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I'd suggest you take this and leave before I call building security." My mother scoffed. "Don't take that tone. We're trying to help you, Rowan. Everyone at the club knows. 29, no husband, no children, married to a job that involves spaying cats. It's not natural. Clients want to see a real businessman at the top. They want to see your brother." "You mean the brother who's never finished anything in his life?" I said. "I have vision," Pierce muttered, defensive. "Dad says I'm a natural, and I'm the one carrying on the family name." Garrett slapped the desk again. The coffee cups jumped. "Pierce is a man, Rowan. People respect a man at the helm. You've had your fun. Step aside and let him handle the real money." I glanced at the 2 investors. The pension director, a woman with 2 daughters of her own, I happened to know, looked like she'd swallowed a wasp. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, leaning back. "You broke into a meeting in front of 2 institutional investors to demand I hand half my company to a man who has never run a business that lasted a fiscal quarter, because he's male and shares your last name." "It's about family," Lorna cut in. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. The least you can do is secure your brother's future. You're being selfish." I felt something cold and almost amused settle in my chest. "Family," I repeated. "You want to talk about family in front of my clients? Is this the same family that wouldn't co-sign my OSAP top-up loan for vet school? $42,000 because Guelph isn't cheap, and then 2 weeks later put a down payment on a BMW for Pierce's 21st? My mother flushed. My father crossed his arms over his chest. Sign the papers, Rowan. Don't make this difficult. I know the property manager in this building personally. We had drinks at the Granite Club. One phone call and your lease is gone. You'll be carrying boxes out into the slush by lunch. I stood up slowly. I made sure to hold his eyes, the eyes that had spent my whole childhood looking at me like a disappointment. And how exactly do you plan to do that? I asked. He smirked. That smug, triumphant look I'd seen 10,000 times. He pulled out his phone. Watch me. I picked up the handset on my desk and slid it across to him. Go ahead, call him. Put it on speaker. I'd love for everyone to hear how you're going to evict me. He hesitated for half a second, surprised I'd called his bluff, but his ego wouldn't let him fold. He dialed, held it up, and the speaker filled the room with the ring. While it rang, my mother decided to twist the knife. You always were ungrateful, she hissed, bracelets clinking. We sacrificed our best years so you could sit in this glass box and play important. And this is how you repay us. I didn't look away from her. Sacrificed, I said. Let's talk about my first year at Guelph. I came to you with the loan paperwork. The bank needed a cosigner. Do you remember what you told me? She lifted her chin. I told you a woman doesn't need that kind of debt. I told you to find someone to take care of you. You told me I was a bad investment, I said. And then you bought Pierce a car. I worked overnights at an emergency animal hospital and pulled doubles at a coffee place on King to pay for it myself. 3 years. I know exactly what a sacrifice costs. The phone clicked. Property management, this is Marcus. My father puffed up. Marcus. Garrett Whitfield. We met at the Granite Club last spring. I'm in Suite 1400, the veterinary outfit. I need a favor, and I know your boss will back me on it. I want this tenant's lease terminated today. She's running an unstable operation. Get security up here. There was a small pause on the line. Mr. Barrow. Whitfield. What exactly would you like me to do? Terminate her lease? Tell the building owner Garrett Whitfield requested it personally. He'll know who I am. Another pause. Then Marcus cleared his throat, and I heard the smile in it. Mr. Pause. Whitfield, I've actually been expecting your call. My father's smirk faltered. You have? Yes, sir. The owner left me very specific instructions this morning. She said a Garrett Whitfield would likely call, and that he might try to use her name to make threats. The owner of this building is Rowan Whitfield, the woman standing in front of you. She purchased this property in full a year and a half ago. She's my employer, so unless you'd like me to send security up to escort you out for trespassing, I'd suggest you have a good afternoon. The line went dead. For a moment, nobody breathed. Garrett stared at the phone like it had bitten him. The color drained out of his face by inches. Lorna gripped the edge of my desk to stay upright. Pierce, by the window, had gone the specific gray of a man calculating how fast he could get to the elevators. The PE principal from Calgary leaned back in his chair and laughed, a real, helpless laugh. That, he said, wiping his eye, is the most satisfying thing I've seen in 20 years of deals. You walked into a building she owns to evict her. My father's voice came out shaky. This is a trick. You hired someone to say that. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. Then I pressed the intercom. Reception. Please send security to my office. 3 individuals need to be escorted out of the building. My mother shrieked that I couldn't throw out my own family. I told her she'd broken into my business and tried to extort half my company in front of clients. And the only reason I wasn't calling Toronto police was that I didn't want their mugshots ruining my afternoon. 2 guards arrived. My father tried to grab the folder off my desk. I put my hand on it flat. Leave it. It's evidence of attempted extortion. Pierce slipped out first, head down. Lorna went screaming over her shoulder that I'd die alone and bitter. Garrett had to be walked out physically when he wouldn't move fast enough. The doors closed. I smoothed my blazer and turned to my investors. I sincerely apologize. Shall we continue? The pension director picked up her pen without a word and signed. The man from Calgary did the same, then shook my hand and said, "If you run your business the way you just ran your father, we're in the right place. $40 million finalized. I'd won the battle. But I knew my family well enough to know they'd start a war by dinner. It took less than 2 hours. My operations lead came in white-faced with a tablet, and there it was, a post going viral across LinkedIn and a couple of Ontario veterinary forums from an anonymous industry watchdog account. But the writing had a signature I recognized. It was my sister-in-law, Cedar. She ran communications for a mid-sized agency and was very, very good at her job. Pierce had clearly run home crying, and Cedar, who genuinely believed he was the wounded party, had unsheathed everything she had. The post accused me of falsifying surgical outcome data, mistreating staff, and overbilling pet insurance providers. It tagged my biggest corporate partners and the College of Veterinarians of Ontario, demanding an investigation. The comments were already a pile-on. Then my desk phone rang. The CEO of a national pet insurance company, one of my oldest clients. "Rowan," he said, "tight. I'm at a charity lunch and your father just worked the room telling everyone you're under investigation by the college and the CRA, that we're going to get raided, and that his son's new clinic chain can take over our accounts. What is going on?" While he was still talking, a court system alert pinged my inbox. Someone had filed a motion to substitute counsel of record on a major malpractice defense we were handling for a breeder client. Except it wasn't legal, it was a forged business transfer document, moving a 6-figure service contract to a brand new entity called Whitfield and Pierce Veterinary Group. My electronic signature was on it. I had never signed it. They were coming for my reputation, my clients, and my money in the same afternoon. I closed the laptop and stood. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to let them dig the hole, and then I was going to fill it in. Here's what I learned later about how it started. Pierce went straight home and told Cedar I'd lost my mind, that I'd verbally attacked his elderly parents, that I was destroying the family out of jealousy. She believed him, she was loyal to a husband she thought loved her, and she lit up her whole network. By Friday morning, the internet was flooded with anonymous articles. She was too smart to use her own name. She used ghostwriters and burner accounts. They invented former employees, fabricated reviews about 100-hour weeks and unpaid overtime, claimed I'd stolen client lists. The legal and veterinary worlds in Toronto are small and they run on gossip. Within 48 hours, the fake stories jumped to mainstream business pages. My phones rang non-stop. A clinic partner I was supposed to lunch with canceled 20 minutes out. Scheduling conflict. Fear plain in his voice. I watched the firestorm consume a reputation I'd spent a decade building, and I refused to let my staff see me bleed. I told reception to stick to one line. We don't engage with internet rumors. Our outcomes and our audited books speak for themselves. But internally, I was mapping every move. And I realized Cedar was burning herself to the ground for a man who didn't respect her. She just didn't know it yet. Meanwhile, my father took his act to the golf simulators and the club lounges where Toronto's old money waits out the winter. Garrett had kept that membership for 30 years, even when he couldn't afford it, because to him, appearance was reality. He found 2 of my oldest corporate clients and, over expensive scotch, played the heartbroken but honorable father. He told them he had it on good authority that the CRA had opened a fraud investigation into me, that my accounts would be frozen, that their retainers were at risk. Then he offered the Lifeboat, a new firm built on family values, run by my brother. What he left out was that he'd liquidated his and my mother's entire RRSP to lease a flashy office in Liberty Village and hire a few desperate, underpaid associates to do the work Pierce couldn't. 2 days later, 2 termination notices hit my inbox. No phone calls, no explanation, cold clipped emails demanding their files be transferred to my brother's outfit. Those 2 accounts were 30% of my projected Q3 revenue, gone in an afternoon. My finance director came in shaking, expecting me to throw things. I just tapped my pen on the desk. Because Garrett, in his arrogance, hadn't noticed his own weakness. He'd tied his entire retirement to a hollow company run by an incompetent son and taken on complex clients neither of them could actually service. They'd stolen the accounts. They had no idea how to keep them. They'd strapped themselves to a time bomb, and I was happy to watch them carry it around. Then Pierce, desperate for a trophy, went further. We were 3 weeks from a hearing on that breeder malpractice file, a case worth a fortune in billings and reputation. He stole my digital credentials, forged my signature with a notary stamp borrowed from one of my father's club friends, and filed the substitution motion to hijack the entire matter to Whitfield and Pierce. The breeder's owner called me screaming that I'd abandoned them. I pulled the docket. There was my signature, a scanned wet ink one, lifted from somewhere, sitting next to my license number. Forging a regulated professional signature on a filed document isn't sharp business, it's fraud, and it carries jail time. I drove to file an emergency injunction to strike the fraudulent motion, and the judge was furious when I showed the forgery. I thought I'd bought a day. I was wrong. By the time I got back, my finance director had gone the color of paper. The bank had placed a temporary hold on our operating and trust accounts, citing a risk review. Sear's smear about embezzlement had tripped the bank's fraud algorithms, and someone had phoned in an anonymous tip to FinTrack claiming my clinics were a front for money laundering. I knew exactly who made that call. Without operating capital, I couldn't make payroll for 2 weeks. Then reception handed me a courier envelope from the college, an emergency complaint, alleging I'd forged documents and endangered animal welfare. Garrett had used his notary friend to file a preemptive complaint, spinning it so I was the forger, framing my own brother because I was unstable. They were dismantling my finances, my reputation, and my license in one afternoon. And then a career set in the enormous arrangement of white lilies on my conference table, a funeral spray, black ribbon and all. The card was in my mother's handwriting. "Come home and apologize. Your father will fix all of this." I ripped the card in half and shoved the whole thing into the bin. It wasn't a funeral for my career. It was a funeral for their delusion. I stopped playing defense. I opened an encrypted file on a prospective client I'd already turned down weeks earlier, a man named Desmond Vale, a glossy real estate developer who'd offered a $500,000 retainer for help structuring international payments through a chain of shell companies in Belize. I'd run a quiet background check through a forensic contact before I declined him. Desmond Vale was a fraudster under active RCMP and FinTrack investigation, the center of a money laundering file the federal task force was quietly building. Any professional who signed on to move that money would instantly become a co-conspirator. I'd dodged that bullet. Now the file was bait. I printed his dossier, highlighted the 500,000 retainer, added a few panicked sticky notes. Can we route around the frozen accounts? To make it look like a desperate woman trying to land the catch of her career. Then I needed a rat. I'd known for a month that a junior associate named Theo was feeding information to my father. I'd caught him in my calendar and noticed his coffee breaks lined up with Garrett's visits. A known spy is just a messenger you haven't used. I called Theo in, set the bright red folder square in the center of my desk under the lamp, and told him I needed him to wait a moment while I ran to grab a form down the hall, and not to let anyone in, because I was expecting a call from Desmond Vale about a $500,000 structuring deal. I watched from the security closet on the hidden camera. The second the door clicked, Theo dove for the folder, photographed every page, set it back exactly, and picked his exhibits up. He'd taken the bait perfectly. I knew Garrett better than he knew himself. When those photos hit his phone, his ego would override what little caution he had. He'd see a $500,000 whale his daughter was supposedly begging to keep, and he'd reach out to Vale himself with all his club lounge charm, promising the world. He wouldn't run a background check. He didn't have the compliance infrastructure to know Desmond Vale was a walking indictment. It went faster than I imagined. Garrett called Vale directly, threw me under the bus as too timid and too bound by ethics, and promised that Whitfield and Pierce had the creative flexibility to move funds across borders without tripping any alarms. To project power, he and Pierce booked a private room at a steakhouse on the waterfront, ordered Wagyu in four-figure bottles, and put the whole thing on a corporate card secretly tied to Sowers's personal credit. Vale told Garrett plainly that the money could never be traced to his domestic operations. A textbook money laundering confession. Any real professional would have stood up and left. Garrett poured another glass and started outlining how to funnel it through Belizean shells and disguise it as consulting fees. Pierce, eager, promised solicitor-client privilege would shield it from the CRA. They shook hands, certain they'd stolen my greatest asset. What they didn't know was that Desmond Vale had been under round-the-clock surveillance for 8 months. The private room was wired. RCMP officers sat in a van on the waterfront with headphones, recording Garrett explaining how to forge consulting contracts and Pierce promising to abuse privilege to hide dirty money. The federal task force was building an airtight case against Vale, and my family had just walked into the center of it. By signing on and advising him, they'd turned themselves from sloppy operators into co-conspirators. I spent that evening on my condo balcony in the distillery district with a glass of red, watching the city light up. My accounts were still frozen, my license still under review, and none of it touched me. I hadn't lifted a finger. I'd set the table, turned on the lights, and let their own greed drag them into a federal case. Then I turned to the third player. Ceres had been merciless, but her loyalty was misplaced, and I was about to cure the blindness. I knew the math of opening a premium clinic chain didn't add up. Garrett's RSP barely covered the deposit and first payroll. Pierce was wearing Italian suits and running ad campaigns. They needed cash fast, and no bank lends to a man who's failed at 4 companies. So I had a forensic accountant friend follow the paper trail behind Whitfield and Pierce. In 48 hours, she sent me the file, and my jaw tightened. Pierce hadn't just borrowed to fund his fantasy, he'd gutted his own wife. He'd leveraged Sowers's spotless credit. He'd taken her sin, forged her signature, submitted fraudulent income documents to a syndicate of predatory commercial lenders, and pulled $500,000 in high-interest loans with her as sole personal guarantor. He'd shielded himself and Garrett from liability. If the firm defaulted, the lenders would come for Sowers's salary, her savings, the life she'd built from nothing. I didn't pity her, but I recognized a woman being exploited by the men in my family, fighting a war for someone who'd strapped a $500,000 bomb to her chest. I compiled the promissory notes, the forged signature logs, the predatory rate schedules, and emailed it to her private account so Pierce couldn't intercept it. Subject line, "Your husband is bankrupting you. Read this before you publish anything else about me." The read receipt pinged in 10 minutes. My phone rang in 15. I let it ring 3 times. "Tell me these are fake," Cyr said, her voice shaking somewhere between hyperventilation and murder. "You work in communications?" I said. "Look at the routing numbers. Look at the timestamps on the notary seals. You know they're real. He used your credit to fund the firm. You're personally on the hook for $500,000. I heard glass shatter against a wall. "He told me he had investors," she whispered. "He told me you were trying to ruin him. I burned your name for a man who stole my identity. I'm going to kill him." "Don't kill him," I said, and I felt the cold smile reach my mouth. "Divorce him. Help me bury him." "My office, 9 tomorrow. We have work to do." She arrived at 9, sharp in a black suit that looked like armor. The hostility of years was gone, replaced by cold mutual understanding. We were 2 women who'd been underestimated and used by the same men. She dropped a stack of records on my desk and paced. She'd been up all night. Pierce had been funneling money from their joint account to cover Garrett's club dues and the Liberty Village lease while calling me a thief online. I want him to feel what I felt looking at those notes, she said. I told her she'd get everything, but we had to be smart. If she confronted him now, he'd panic and hide assets, and Garrett would step in to play victim. We had to let them reach the very top of their delusion before we kicked the ladder out. 4 days, I said. My mother was hosting a 30th anniversary gala at the Royal York that weekend, half the city invited, doubling as the public launch of Whitfield and Pierce. That's where you serve him. But first, I'm going to make sure the federal government serves him. I told her about Desmond Vale, the surveillance, the wire. I watched her eyes widen and a slow, dangerous smile spread. A communications expert knows exactly how an RCMP arrest plays at a black tie gala. It was perfect. Across town, Pierce signed Vale's representation agreement with a gold pen he didn't read the fine print on, designating himself lead representative and guarantor on the offshore accounts. Garrett signed a senior partner authorizing the transfers. They were no longer arrogant men playing at theft. They were documented participants in a federal file. In the van across the street, the agents locked in the recording and the warrants moved. I stood on the mezzanine of the Royal York's ballroom that Saturday, unseen, looking down at the most expensive illusion my mother had ever staged. Crystal, white orchids, a string quartet, MPs and judges, and a couple of local news anchors. Funded by Cerese's stolen credit and a dirty retainer they thought they'd secured. They were throwing the party of the year on a sinking ship. My father took the microphone, welcomed the city's elite, announced Whitfield and Pierce as the Midwest's, he actually said Midwest, in Toronto, premier veterinary group. Then my mother stepped up, diamonds catching the light, and gave the speech she built for this exact audience. Loyalty, integrity, family standing united. And looking at my brilliant son tonight, she said, I know we succeeded. Applause. Then her smile tightened. Building a legacy sometimes means painful choices. Sometimes a branch of the tree is unhealthy and you cut it out. We had to part ways with someone who chose greed over her own blood. A woman so blinded by ambition she forgot her place, who'll end up alone in an empty office because she lacks the warmth to keep a family. A delighted little murmur ran through the crowd. They love a veiled scandal. I checked my watch. The timing was flawless. I came down the staircase in a sharp white suit, the only light thing in a sea of black tie, and walked into the room just as the applause faded. It took 10 seconds for the whispers to start. The discarded daughter striding in like she owned the place. Senators parted. Up on the dais my mother's smile collapsed. Pierce spilled his drink down his tuxedo. Garrett and Pierce intercepted me, smiles pasted on for the crowd. My father gripped my arm hard. You're trespassing. Get out before I have you dragged out. I removed his hand, brushing my sleeve like he'd left a stain. I'm not trespassing, I said pleasantly. I'm here on business. Earlier this week, I was retained as counsel for Apex Capital, the lender holding $500,000 in predatory debt against your brand new firm. Since you've dodged their calls all week, they sent me to deliver a notice of default in person. I'm not a guest. I'm your largest creditor. Pierce stopped breathing. Garrett whispered that I was bluffing, that they had a $50 million client behind them. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and raised it. I'm not here to ruin your night. I'm here for the grand finale. I checked my watch. You've got about 3 minutes left to be the toast of the city. I'd finish your drinks. They hurried back to the dais where a 5-tier cake sat under the lights with the firm's logo in gold. My mother handed Pierce the knife. The band struck up. They posed for the cameras. Then, the ballroom doors blew open hard enough to crack a handle against the wall, and the music died in a screech of violins. Through the entrance came a column of RCMP officers in tactical jackets, the letters bright across their backs. Champagne flutes froze. The crowd parted in a scramble. The lead officer, gray-haired and granite-faced, walked straight to the dais. The cake knife slipped from Pierce's hand and rang against the floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Garrett blustered, puffing up one last time. "This is a private event. You have no jurisdiction. Garrett Whitfield." Pierce Whitfield. The officer held up the warrant. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Step away from the table and put your hands where I can see them. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, we took your newest client, Desmond Vale, into custody at a private airfield. We recovered a signed representation agreement and offshore banking authorizations detailing a conspiracy to launder funds through shell companies in Belize. Both your signatures are on the guarantor lines." Pierce's knees buckled. "He made me sign it," he cried, pointing at our father. "I didn't read it. He said it was a standard retainer." "Shut your mouth, you idiot," Garrett hissed, his fatherly devotion gone the instant his own freedom was on the line. The officer turned Garrett against the table, the cake wobbling and the cuffs clicked shut. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. They cuffed Pierce beside him, and he sobbed like a child in a tuxedo bought with his wife's stolen credit. Pierce twisted around, searching the crowd, and found Suresh in her emerald gown. "Suresh, fix this. Call your contacts, put out a statement, tell them my sister set us up. Do your job." Suresh didn't reach for her phone. She walked up the steps, past my weeping mother without a glance, and adjusted the microphone. The room held its breath. "My husband is asking me to manage a crisis," she said, voice crisp and clear. "He wants me to tell all of you, judges, MPs, the people in this room, that this arrest is a misunderstanding." Pierce nodded frantically. "I'm a communications professional," she went on, looking down at him with pure contempt. "And the first rule is that you can't spin a story built entirely on fraud." She pulled a thick stack of papers from her clutch and held it up. "There is no brilliant firm. The office, the suits, the bottles, this whole gala, none of it was funded by legitimate work. It was funded by identity theft. While I was asleep in our home, my husband took my SIN, forged my signature, and made me the sole guarantor on $500,000 of predatory debt. He bankrupted his own wife to buy his father's approval." The crowd recoiled from Pierce. Stealing from clients was a corporate crime. Gutting your own wife to fund vanity was something this room couldn't stomach. "And one more thing," she said, eyes flashing. "When I found the loans, I didn't just cry. I went through his computer. I found the filing logs, the notary stamps your father supplied, the forged signature on a hijacked malpractice file. He begged me to use my connections, so I did. Yesterday, I hand-delivered those documents to the college and to the federal prosecutors. I'm the one who gave them the last nail." She crossed to Pierce and slapped a single page against his chest. It fluttered to the floor. "And those are your divorce papers. I filed under emergency provisions this afternoon. You have nothing left to take from me." She walked down the center aisle, past my collapsed mother, toward the staircase where I waited. Regal. She didn't look back. My mother, mascara and black streaks, scrambled up off the floor and threw herself at me, nails in my white sleeve. "Rowan, you have to save them. You're a powerful woman. You know everyone. Call a judge, post bail, hire the best defense in the country. Money is nothing to you. You own a building. Don't let them take my family. I'm sorry for what I said up there. I was upset. I've always loved you." I looked down at her. The woman who'd called me a bad investment, who'd refused to co-sign my loan and bought my brother a car, who'd stood at a microphone 15 minutes ago and called me a discarded, loveless failure. Now she was on her knees because her accounts were empty. I leaned down until my face was inches from hers. "Do you remember the Christmas I was 26, I said quietly, just for her, when you stood in front of the whole family and said I was an embarrassment to the name, that a woman without a husband is a failure? You told me to look at Garrett and Pierce if I wanted to understand real success." She froze. "Look at them now. Look at the great men you were so proud of." I pried her fingers off my sleeve. I built all of this myself. I own the building they tried to steal. And I don't owe a single man anything. You want me to spend my money to save them? I won't spend $1 to take out my own trash. She crumpled, wailing, and I didn't look back. Outside, sleet again, the federal vehicles flashing red and blue against the wet stone of Front Street. I watched them duck Garrett and Pierce into a van, heads down against the cameras. No suits of arrogance left, just two men facing a game they should never have played. I texted my assistant, "The trash is out." Draft a release for tomorrow. Whitfield Veterinary will be assuming every account the new firm tried to steal. 6 months later, the courts did the rest. Garrett, in a prison-issued jumpsuit, lost his ability to ever sit on a board again and drew a 5-year sentence. The man who bragged about his connections now mops a cafeteria floor and tells stories nobody listens to. Pierce took a plea to avoid joining him. Sawerse's lawyers strapped every dollar of that debt to his name in the divorce, and he filed for bankruptcy. The man who demanded my CEO chair now works overnight unloading trucks at a big box store in Scarborough, takes the bus because his BMW was repossessed, and rents a basement room with a leaking ceiling. My mother lost the house to the bank, got blocked by every friend at the club, and now lives in a cramped apartment at the edge of the city. Screening calls from collectors. High society practices strict self-preservation. Nobody associates with the wife of a convicted fraudster. She came to my office on a rainy Tuesday in a faded coat, gray at the roots, and collapsed in my guest chair, begging for a monthly allowance. Just a few thousand. It's pocket change to you. You have 3 floors of this tower. I let her cry. Then I opened my drawer and set a document on the desk beside a single check for $1,000. A cease and desist, a non-disclosure, and a formal severance of family ties. Never contact me, my home, my staff. Never speak my name to anyone. She stared at the check. $1,000? That won't cover 2 months' rent. I'm your mother. I told her she'd lost that title a long time ago, that the check wasn't a lifeline, it was a bus ticket back to her apartment, and the price of her permanent silence. Her hands shook as she signed, tears falling on the page because her own greed had left her no other choice. "You're heartless," she whispered. "I learned from the best," I said. "Now get out of my building." That evening, I took the elevator to the penthouse floor and stepped onto the terrace. The lake was a flat gray shine, and the towers were going gold and crimson in the last of the light. The weight I'd carried for 29 years was simply gone. The door slid open behind me, and Ceresi came out with 2 glasses of wine and stood at the railing beside me. My new director of communications, an equity stake, and an unlimited budget. The haunted look of betrayal long gone from her eyes. We were 2 women, had tried to use as stepping stones, standing shoulder to shoulder over the city we now ran. "Your mother came in today," she said, sipping. "She left with a bus ticket and a contract that erases her from my life." Saray smiled. "Pierce tried to call my office yesterday. Wanted a character reference for his bankruptcy hearing, crying about his blistered hands. Did you take it? I had security block his number across the company. The man who stole my identity doesn't get my mercy when the bill comes due." I raised my glass into the cold air. "To the arrogant men who thought we were collateral damage." She touched her glass to mine, the chime clear over the wind. "And to the families foolish enough to underestimate women who refuse to bow." We drank and looked out over the city, and the long winter of the Whitfield men was over for good. If you've ever had to draw a hard line and cut a toxic family loose to protect your own peace, tell me your story in the comments and where you're watching from. Blood doesn't buy anyone the right to bleed you dry. Setting a boundary isn't cruelty. It's the cleanest kind of self-respect there is. For a long time, I believed that if I just achieved enough, my family would finally turn around and see me. I keep coming back to the morning my father dropped that folder on my desk, so certain the room belonged to him, and I realize now that none of what happened to the Whitfield men was bad luck. Every piece of their ruin was something they built with their own hands, brick by brick, while telling themselves they were untouchable. Garrett spent 30 years deciding that appearances were the same thing as substance, that a club membership and a loud voice could stand in for actual character. So when the chance came to grab money he didn't understand, he reached for it without a second of pause, and the lie he told himself, that rules were for smaller people, was the exact thing that put the cuffs on his wrists. Pierce never once finished what he started, never built the kind of inner steel that only comes from failing quietly and trying again, so the moment real pressure arrived, he did the cowardly thing and stole from the one person who loved him. Cause and effect. They didn't trip into a federal file. They walked there, one choice at a time. What saved me wasn't that I was smarter or richer than them, it was that I refused to let their version of me become the truth. I think about 3 things I had to grow in myself over those years, almost without noticing. The first was a steady sense of right and wrong that I wouldn't bend, even when bending would have been easier. I kept Desmond Vale's file at arm's length when a desperate person would have grabbed the retainer, and that one decision is the whole reason I was the trap and not the prey. The second was learning to actually think before I reacted, to sit still while my hands shook and ask what the smartest move was instead of the loudest one. And the third was the plain refusal to quit. 3 years of overnight shifts and instant noodles taught me that I could outlast almost anything, and that endurance was worth more than any inheritance they dangled and pulled away. Sawirs taught me something too. The night she stopped fighting for the man who'd wronged her and started fighting for herself. Loyalty to someone who's bleeding you dry isn't love. It's a habit you can break. I don't tell this story because I think revenge is the point. The point is that no one, not a father, not a mother, not the people who share your last name, gets to hand you a smaller life and call it your place. Build the kind of conscience that won't be bought, the kind of mind that stays clear under fire, and the kind of backbone that doesn't fold when the bank account does. Do that, and you become impossible to break. The people who underestimated me are still living inside the consequences of who they chose to be. I'm just living in the building I bought.